talked about I've talked about failure, I've talked about problem solving, I've talked about obsession, and I wanted to try something different. I wanted to talk about inspiration. There's a lot of inspiration in this room. There's a lot of people finding reasons to be inspired in this room. There's a lot of people traveling and discovering that inspiration is part of this community, and this community is feeding them. And it's one of the really difficult things when you're a lonely 15-year-old, because every 15-year-old is lonely, and trying to figure out what your passion in life is, as I was. Inspiration comes from all sorts of weird places. I was 15 when my friend Tim Podell took me to my first juggling convention, and I discovered that girls actually juggled. That was inspiring. What I say, you can't choose what inspires you. And I want to tell you a slightly embarrassing story. I was 14 years old, 15 years old, it's 1983, and this movie comes out. And this movie is all about someone who's following their passion. And it's all about someone who's following their passion and not compromising. And when I was finished watching this movie, we got back to my house. I grew up in Westchester County, so we had these big wide streets. And I went out, I said to my mom, I wanted to go for a walk. And the movie had inspired me so much. I had sort of started to see some kind of field ahead of me, instead of just like the steady grind of school. Like, I started to see the picture of my life was one where I could actually make choices and I could follow them through, and this was really exciting. And I was walking the streets thinking, yeah, you gotta follow your dreams. That's what you gotta do. You can't compromise. You gotta follow your dreams. This movie was called Flashdance. It's a terrible movie, but the fact that it inspired me is important. A couple years later, Reebok did an ad campaign called Reebok's Let You Be You, and they spelled it U-B-U. Everyone who's my age or older remembers this. Reebok's Let You Be You. Now, forget about the fact that they had no knowledge of Alfred Jarret and Pere Ubu and the beginning of Surrealist theater. They actually built this ad on a set of quotes, which I guess had come somewhere out of Bartlett's quotations or something. But this ad, this set of quotes that were in this really, really rocked my world and really kind of upset me how pointed and important these quotes were. And I'll just give you a couple of them. There were, now understand that these quotes are probably from like 50, 80 years ago, so when they say man, these days we'd say, you know, man or woman, he or she. So it says, whoso would be a man must be a nonconformist. There comes a time in every man's life when he discovers that envy is ignorance. Now, about a year after that ad campaign came out, and I had written down all these things because they had slayed me. I met the guys who wrote the ad campaign, and those, I want to use a curse word to describe them. Those freaking guys lied to me about where they got those quotes. They actually said, oh, we got those out of a quotation book. It turns out they got all those quotes from a single volume that I got as a gift about a year later called Self-Reliance by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Thank you. So if you haven't read Self-Reliance by Ralph Waldo Emerson, and you can get past some of his religious stuff in there, it's a really, really important book. One of the most important things, so it says all of those quotes from the Reebok ad are yanked out of first paragraphs of Self-Reliance. So I brought some volumes here, and as part of this grand conversation, and I had this conversation a lot with people in my 20s, I would pull these books out of my library and I would talk to them about these things that I found inspiring. So I've actually gone back into my library and I pulled these books out. I pulled out some E. E. Cummings, I pulled out some Rilke, some Tim Galloway, and some Raymond Chandler. And I want to read to you some things that have inspired me over the years. Now, I was hoping to have a head mic, but I got a handheld, so you're going to have to bear with my, my ham-handedness for a second. Like a room full of problem solvers. So here's these pieces. I find inspiration in other people. I find inspiration in looking at things I think are beautiful, but I also have found over my life a tremendous amount of inspiration in words that other people have written. And Emerson begins his essay describing having read some words by someone that were amazing. He says, I read the other day some verses written by a painter which were original and not conventional. And then he blows my mind by saying, the soul always hears an admonition in such lines. An admonition. The soul hears this voice calling out to it. And then he says, to believe that what is true in your secret heart is true for all men. To believe that what is true for your secret heart is true for all men, that is genius. This hit me like a ton of bricks. This was in a Reebok ad. And I was like, why is a Reebok ad making me weepy? It really shouldn't be. I was mad at those guys. In every work of genius, he says, in every work of genius, we recognize our own rejected thoughts. This is something, I'm speaking to the kids in the audience. There's a connection you're going to feel to things that you really love. There's a connection you're going to feel to the things that really get you going, whether it's Hellboy or it's Unreal Tournament or whatever it is. There's a connection you're going to feel to either other people doing it or the thing that you love about doing it. And he says, in every work of genius, we recognize our own rejected thoughts. They come back to us with a certain alienated majesty. This is like, to say things like actors play themselves the best. I really believe that. I really believe that, the thing that makes people great performers, great communicators is being themselves. I mean, come on, would any of you put Jamie Heineman on television? No, I wouldn't have, until the first time I saw him on camera, and I was like, my God, he doesn't care that the camera's there. He's just him. He's just a perfectly natural, egoless being. It's astonishing. So the inspiration, what does the inspiration give me? It gives me some type of transformation. It tells me that transformation is possible. Whenever I'm inspired because I believe that things can change. I'm inspired because I believe that I can change. So if this were a paper, if I were writing an essay, I would start with an introduction, and often introductions start with a couple of quotes. So one of my favorite poets is E. Cummings. He's an unbelievable and amazing poet. And for those of you out there who are punctuationally challenged, and I suspect there are a few, E. Cummings is your man because he doesn't care about punctuation. Periods, commas, they're all over the place. But he has a book called Is Five, a book of poems called Is Five. That's the name of the book. And he says, on the assumption that my technique is either complicated or original, or both, which his work is, it's both super complicated and super original. The publishers have politely requested me to write an introduction to this book. And then he's satisfying his publishers because they want to sell books, they want him to write an intro, and he's belligerently doing this. He says, at least my theory of technique, if I have one, is far from original and it's not very complicated. I can express it in 15 words. By quoting the eternal question from vaudeville, would you hit a woman with a child? No, I would hit her with a brick. He says, like the burlesque comedian, I am abnormally fond of that precision which creates movement. The precision of language which creates movement in your mind, something that surprises you. I read this at 20, and I fell in love with E. Cummings for having written this. Actually, so I was just going to do that quote, but then he goes on to actually talk about, if a poet is anybody, he is somebody to whom things made matter very little. Someone who is obsessed by making. Hello? The other piece of writing that I would quote is from, was originally posted in the New Yorker as a short story called Us or Me, and eventually was the opening chapter to Ian McEwan's book, Enduring Love. And in Enduring Love, he describes, again, go out and get every one of these books. Enduring Love begins with a balloon accident. People having lunch on a park, and they're watching, well, they're just supposed to